Hey folks, it's Tom, your frugal prepper. Today I want to do a video about multimeters and some of the functionality that you can get for a very affordable price and some of the basic functions you're going to need and how to get those. Alright, so we'll get started with the super cheap, and then we'll go through this. This is just the collection of meters that I have right now that I use for automotive work. You start off with the old 7-function digital multimeter from Harbor Freight. You can get this free with a free coupon. And, it does, DC voltage, AC voltage. It does some DC amperage, right? It has a little transistor tester on it. It's got your little on-off switch. It's actually not a terrible meter. That seems fairly accurate. Really accurate enough for automotive work to see if your alternator's putting out enough volts, right? The test probes they give you with these are really chintzy though. And so if you're going to be measuring any type of 120 volt type stuff or, household wiring, just be careful because these really have a tendency to come apart at the edges and have bare exposed wires. So just be careful. You might want to put some, some super glue or epoxy around the edges where they crack off there so that they won't do that. Although the set with this one seems more flexible than ones I've got in the past, so maybe they have upgraded these a little bit. What's nice about these probes is the tips are very, very fine on these. And so I actually have several sets of these probes. Some of them just clipped them off and have them stripped out to a piece of wire because this can make a decent front probe if it fits in the connector just right. So don't discount that. And if you're just getting started out and you just need to do some basic measurements for voltage and continuity and ohms, this meter will probably work just fine. And get it free with a coupon while you're buying something else, and you can throw it away when you're done with it, when it no longer works. So most of these cheap meters like this, they measure DC amperage, and you have to be in line with the circuit. So you're going to have to cut a wire. And they'll only go up to 10 amps, and they have an internal fuse. If you go over that 10 amps, that will pop. Sometimes they're really hard fuses to find. So that's an important consideration with the meter. Is to take like a little standard bus fuse or something. There's a snap-on multimeter that uses a standard like automotive style fuse, which I think is ingenious. And what will happen in always there's another for you to measure your amperage. You have to move to this other connection than you're normally on for volts. And if you leave your wire plugged in there from doing a current measurement, then you go measure voltage, you'll pop that fuse. So always make sure you don't leave your wire in there by default, and then grab it. I think this type of meter is great for doing something like a parasitic draw test, where you can just take off one of the battery cables and put one probe on each cable. The meter that I kind of go to a lot, just as a quick meter right now, though, is this little Craftsman. These can commonly be found on sale for $10. It's part number 8T141. If you still happen to have a Sears, I'm sure they have them online too. It's actually been a decent meter. It's durable. I've dropped it. I beat it up. It's held up to it just fine. And again, it's all the same basic functionality as the Harbor Freight without a transistor tester, which you're never going to need in automotive, right? So, yeah, this has been a good meter. Now, I have different probes. It doesn't come with these alligator clip probes, but I put these on here, which these are just handy for automotive work if you need to clip onto something. You always want good, decent probes. And so these probes actually came with this meter. This is an old 1990s meter here. This is the one that's got the tachometer built into it. It's got the 12 tack. But again, all the same basic functionality. This needs batteries. As any other meter, I hardly ever use this anymore, but it's been a decent, accurate little meter. What I do use that came with that is this inductive clamp. I use this a lot with my scope now to get secondary ignition waveforms, which are so sweet when you can get them, because you can diagnose that misfire without pulling anything apart. And let's talk about probes for a minute. Like, I don't necessarily look at the CAT rating on probes, but most probes that are decent will be labeled with a CAT rating that tells you what kind of voltages they're rated for and all that. But I just look for something that's insulated really well, that the ends are good on. I like my wires to be nice and flexible. And that's what I do. And whenever I have a meter that dies, I never throw away the probes. I always keep those. I like this big old analog meter. A big meter with a big sweeping gauge. Now these meters have impedance, so if you're using them to measure in certain situations, that impedance can interfere with the signal that you're measuring. So they're not perfect for everything. This meter is actually very accurate for an analog meter. This is an old Radio Shack branded Micronta. This is actually my first meter. But it's a real nice, it's a beast. It takes like 4 D batteries in the back of it and a 9 volt. It does the amperage. It's got your settings up here. It's got your adjustment for your ohms. But if you have a signal that say is pretty steady, but it has a quick dip in it, or you want to be able to see if it increases at a regular rate, a scope is the best way to do that. If you don't have a scope and you need to check a throttle position sensor, this is what you want. Because analog meters have like a sampling rate. There's a delay in how fast they'll read. And a Harbor Freight one has actually got a terrible one, and the Sears is a little better, right? But this is instant to see that dip. So an analog meter can kind of help you out in that it has a very fast response rate. Instant. So there are still situations where I use that meter, and I love that meter. So my newest acquisition, which I really have loved, is I've needed an amp clamp for a long time. So in all these meters, if you want to measure amperage, you'd actually have to cut the wire and then let the current flow through the meter. And that, of course, limits you to 10 amps. There are a few meters out there that'll do 20. But an amp clamp lets you clamp around that wire. So I can take a fuse out, and I put this fuse holder right here in line and plug these connections into where the fuse is. And then I can clip around here and take that current measurement. You can see me do this on the Porsche video where I'm diagnosing the fuel pump. Now this will show you a positive and a negative on here. The current has to come in here and go out here, go out this way. So you have to put it on in the right direction to measure the current. It doesn't measure negative current in the wrong direction. It measures no current. And so this is the tach life. And so what you have to be aware of on these clamp meters, it's important, is many of the cheap ones that you see out there that are like $12 and $15 and $20 are AC only. So when you build this clamp section, if you just have a ferrite ring, you can measure the current of AC passing through it, because the inductance of the current, right, the AC switching back and forth, creates a current in the ring around it. Direct current passing in only one direction won't do that unless you loop it around and around and around. And so you have to have actually a little transistor in here that steps it up and does a lot of fancy stuff. I tried to build my own amp clamp for a while, and I was semi-successful, but not successful enough that it would be usable. So I bought this little guy. This little guy is pretty cheap. I'll put a link to it down below. But it's I believe in the less than $30 range, and it's a DC meter. This thing is well built. I mean, it's sturdy. It doesn't have the world's greatest display. I mean, it's kind of a basic little display there, but it does have a backlight button, which will backlight the display to make it easier to see in dark places, which is very handy. But it's not color or super fancy. It's auto ranging, and we can talk about that for a minute too. Auto ranging meters are okay, but it takes it a split second every time you go to measure voltage to range to the right voltage. So if you're trying to get quick measurements, it might not be the best choice for you in an automotive world. You might want to be like, you know what, I know I'm measuring 12 volts, so I'm going to set this thing on 20 volts DC and get my reading. It'll get it faster than an auto ranging that's like, let me see what voltage range I'm going to be in, and it thinks about it, and then it shows you the voltage. But I found this meter to be exceptionally accurate. Comparing it to all my other meters, it's durable. I've used it quite a bit. It comes with a really nice set of probes here. And I don't know that they have a cat rating on them, but they're really well built, sturdy little probes. Very flexible little wires. I mean, not the most flexible wires I've seen, but flexible enough. This, of course, does not come with it. I built this myself. With just a little fuse jumper. It comes with a very nice, actually, it's a very small print. You'll need a magnifying glass. But it's actually got a very nice manual that walks you through a lot of functions that this meter can do. I mean, this manual is quite a bit long and very detailed. I was impressed. So if you are a DIYer and you want something that can measure current, so you want to know, is that fuel pump drawing current? You want to measure parasitic draw without disconnecting a battery cable. You want to know how much current that starter's drawing. You can also put this on a battery cable, right? And watch how much current is going into the battery from the alternator. And you can flip it around if the alternator's not working and see how much current's being drawn out of the battery to run the car. So that's a real handy function that you can do with this. That'll help you out a lot. And a lot of these run like $100 or more to get the DC one. So this is a super screaming hot deal, I think. The bright orange buttons are kind of easy to see, but the white lettering on them, not so much. I'm not digging it. But it's something I'll live with for the price. I think black lettering on there would be better if you're watching Tech Life. But yeah, very good meter. And there'll be a link to that down below. Another thing to consider is if you just need a certain range. So this one has a couple ranges for amperage. Let me see what they are for you real quick. Okay, it's got a 40 amp and a 400 amp. Okay, 40 amp for little things and 400 amp for testing your starter. But you might consider one of these. This is a new acquisition. I've got to play with it just a little bit yet. I haven't really actually used it in a troubleshooting scenario yet, just playing around. But this is actually a pretty nice little DC amp probe. Now it comes out to this BNC, but you can get you an adapter that'll split that off to some regular ends. And then this basically has a scale with it, and so a certain amount of amps equals a certain voltage. So you can hook that up to a regular meter and read it. I don't know exactly, but say 1.21 volts, right, would be 1.21 amps, or however that works. So you can read it on a multimeter, and according to what the range is, it's got a 0 button. It's got 2 settings. It's got 1 microvolt equals 10 amps, and then it's got a setting 1 microvolt equals 100 milliamps. So you can do the math and figure that out. And if you're running a Handtech scope, you can just tell it in the software which probe you're running. They make this in a 65, I believe a 300, or maybe a 400, and they make it in like an 1100. Oh no, I think it's a 600 and an 1100, maybe. But you can tell the software on the Handtech scope which one you're running, and it automatically does the calculations for you, which is nice. I do want to get a Handtech 8-channel scope soon. That's going to be my next big investment. So that's like $110 or $120, but that's a big investment for somebody that just does this on the side to make a little extra money. Other things you might think about that you might need is some wire piercing probes, right? So that you can take measurements on wires. I just have an assortment. Different ones work better on different kinds of wires. I'll put links to all these down below. But these all work relatively well. These power probe ones are actually my favorite. I would like to get another set of these actually. And you're going to need something to be able to probe with. And you normally want a back probe. So this is thanks to Keith from New Level Auto, who told me about this at first. This is the SG Tool Aid 20-piece back probe set. It's real nice. I keep actually a set of alligator clip jumper wires in here as well, but it comes with these little connectors to hook them up to your meter or scope, and it comes with all these different back probes with different angles. This should also have a black wire over here. I have sacrificed the black wire to a radiator fan, unfortunately. So these are pretty inexpensive as far as back probe kits go. I'll put a link to it down below. I think this is great for the DIYer or just a quick diagnostic thing. So that's something you might want to think about investing in if you're going to get into doing some different electrical work. Maybe that gives some other people some ideas as to what I use. I can't say that I'm at an Eric O. or a Keith at New Level Auto or a Pine Hollow Diagnostics level of diagnosis. You know, I don't even own a bidirectional scan tool yet, but I do fix a lot of electrical stuff, and I figure it out and work my way around it. And that's good. You know, I can find, you know, bad sensors, and I can measure fuel injector pulse. But this guy can actually see if the fuel injector is really opening. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with a basic scope and very basic electrical diagnostic equipment. And it's 90% knowing how to do the test, knowing how to read the results that you get from the test, and it's 10% how good of equipment you have. So it's what's in your brain that counts as far as electrical work. You know, you can make a diagnosis with this if you have to, with a test light, right? Test lights are actually a great tool. If you know how to use them right, if you know the logic of what's going on in the circuit. I would say if you want to get better at diagnostics, the first place to start is not a $10,000 snap-on scan tool. The first place to start would be going through schematics. Go to BBB Industries and just download schematics and follow them and learn how to read them, right? Learn what all the different codes, symbols, and everything means on the schematic. Learn how to look at, okay, it goes to this ground. Learn how to go in and look up that ground distribution point and find it. You can just do it on your own vehicle, right? Because that's going to save you a lot of time in the diagnostic process, and you're going to understand the theory of the circuit so that you can form a hypothesis and know how to test that hypothesis. And a lot of times, diagnostic and electrical stuff can just be a process of elimination. You keep forming a hypothesis, and you see if that one's right. And when you find the one that sticks, you've found the problem. So, that's all I got, folks. I'll talk to y'all later. This is Tom for Frugal Prepper.